to Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Maxed Out Man episode 4, and this is Fred Neth, one of my favorite men in the world, and I think somebody that I don't know anybody that's a better long-term example of a life well lived as a man. And you can correct me and tell me how you got here and the failures you've had and when you were a jerk and how you're less of a jerk now and all that.
We're not going into failures.
Right, yeah. So this is, I'm very excited to have you come do this. This is, it's a great way to capture some of this stuff too. I think that's fun. And just when you think about someone that is in his early 90s, to continue to serve as an example, not only as a man, a husband, a father, a man of God, a guy that's, still physically active and fit and smart and cognitive and all of those things that people often don't associate with
Keep
someone.
talking. I like it.
Yeah, you like it? Someone that doesn't normally, stuff that's not normally associated with being, in your 90s, right? So I think what would be best is if you kind of give it, and obviously it's such a short time frame for your life, so it's not, it'll be so easy to describe. But I'm interested kind of in if somebody said, hey, well, what's your background? Vocationally is always interesting, I think, especially with yours. So kind of, if you don't mind, give me kind of the rundown of some of your vocational history, if you will, because you would have been born in the, 30s? Early 30s?
31.
31.
During the middle of the Depression.
Right in the middle of the Depression.
Right. And in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And men were having a hard time finding jobs during the Depression. They were riding the freight cars from town to town, city to city to try to find jobs. Mm-hmm. And my father landed a job up in the state of Washington. The government was building the Meriwether Dam, which is on the Lewis River in southwestern Washington. Mm. And he landed a job there. So we were living in a little cabin on the Lewis River, just a few miles down from the dam project.
And were those cabins part of the government?
No,
that was just independent housing?
Independent, all by itself. Mm. And that was I spent my first 5 years there. Mm. And pretty isolated from anybody. I had 2 older sisters, but it was, as I reflect now, it was really pretty rough. Mm. Although I didn't know it at the time.
Right.
And we had an outhouse. Sears Roebuck catalog was our toilet paper, and our well was outside. We had to go out to the wellhead to hand pump the water, bring it into the house. Heated by wood. One of my jobs was to keep the wood box full for my mother in the wood cook stove.
Okay.
So yeah, I just point that out to kind of recapture the time when things were really difficult.
Yeah.
But I wasn't aware of being deprived. I slept outside on a sleeping porch, summer and winter, with big quilts over me. And one of the wonderful memories I have is of the rain dripping off of the roof of the sunroom where I was.
So did they actually call it a sleeping porch, or was it just called a sunroom?
Sleeping porch.
I've never even heard that term.
Yeah.
It's fairly common back then, I guess.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think it was. I think it was because people utilized the space. But I had a big, heavy comforter. I still remember it, and how neat it was just to nestle in that comforter when hear the rain falling and dripping off the roof. And
yeah, Pacific Northwest. There's a decent amount of rain.
Lots of rain.
Were you guys? Is that a foresty area out there?
Yeah, it is.
So you had the evergreens.
It is. So anyway, that was my first 5 years, and then the folks moved back to Portland. I don't know what the reason for my father's change in jobs, but he got another position of supervising construction of a logging town in eastern Oregon. So we moved to Portland, and my dad drove then during the week to south of Bend, where this town was being constructed, town of Gilchrist. And and I think the folks wanted us in public schools in Portland, my sisters and myself. And so I grew up in Portland.
So Portland at that time would have just been an old logging town, essentially, or was it a big city at that time?
To me, it was a big city.
A little different now. Yeah. A little different than it is now, I assume.
Yeah. Beautiful town, beautiful city at that time. It's changed now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But
do you guys go back very much?
I have no reason.
No reason to go back. Because your family lives in Washington. If you go see family, right?
Yeah. While they were living, my mother lived in Portland. My folks split up when I was just getting out of college or getting out of high school, and so I went to high school in Portland and graduated, and from there went to college in California. I had a major change in my life come right as I was graduating from high school that I had never heard about the Christian faith very much. Grew up never going to church, really. And so my sister and her husband were having marital troubles and probably headed for a divorce. And I used to go over there a lot because my folks didn't get along very well. It was a pretty dysfunctional marriage as far as my folks were concerned. And so I'd go over to my sister's place and with her and her husband. And they always had a lot of liquor up in the cupboard. And so we'd always get over there to drink and relax and just hang out while I was in high school. Well, one day I went to my sister's place and there was no liquor in the cupboard. I thought, what's going on? And so my sister explained to me that she went to this pastor for counseling, and he led her to Christ, whatever that meant at that time.
Yeah.
And the change was dramatic. And then about 3 weeks later, my brother-in-law did the same thing. Well, the change was incredible, and that got my attention. And so she started telling me about who Jesus is and about what salvation is. And I'd never heard these things before. Nobody had ever talked to me about these kinds of things. And I was intrigued. And so one thing led to another. And on Good Friday of my senior year, just before graduation, I too received Christ. And I'd been a real hellraiser as a teenager. I just created a lot of trouble.
For yourself and for others?
Both. My mother would wait up for me to come home. And sometimes I'd get home 1, 2 in the morning, pull in the driveway, and more often than not, a sheriff would come in right behind me, and so my mother just went through it with me.
Yeah.
You get so self-centered and selfish, and the typical thing.
Yeah.
And I think now, if I were a teenager, I don't know what I'd get into.
Yeah. There's plenty, for sure.
I mean, it's wide open. So anyway, my transformation was total. I mean, inside out, upside down, whatever you want to say, and I was really excited, and I figured anything that's this important, that has this kind of impact, I need to give my life to. And so I felt a distinct call to go into some type of Christian work at that point. So I went to California to go to school after I graduated, kind of anticipating that. And went to Santa Barbara, college in Santa Barbara, and that's where I met my wife. And so at graduation, after graduation, we got married. I was in probation, juvenile probation work for a few years.
Like a social worker kind of role? Or?
More directly involved with teenage boys.
Okay.
I worked at a camp where the court had they become wards of the court, and then were put into this camp, and it was designed by Santa Barbara and Ventura counties to keep these boys out of the prison system. This is kind of an interim kind of thing.
Pre-prison.
Pre-prison. But they were confined there.
Okay.
For probably about a year. And so that's where I worked for the last 2 years at college. I was a juvenile probation officer. And then after college, then I got called into the service.
And your degree is in social work, or what is your...
No, my degree is in biblical languages.
Okay.
Greek. So that's what I took. I figured, well, if I'm going into Christian work, I need to know what the scriptures say.
Right.
And the importance of doing it in the original language.
Yeah.
So that's what I focused on, and I was really focused on it, really centered on that. We got married. We graduated in June. Got married in July or in August.
And you just celebrated 70 years last August. How many years?
It'll be 70 next August.
Next August.
So
that's crazy.
We're trying to stay alive till
Stay
August.
alive till August.
Till 70.
All right. So you got called to the service.
I got called to the service. I had an opportunity. This was right at the close of the Korean War, and there was still uncertainty whether that armistice would hold. So I had an 8-year commitment, and
Army, is that what?
Yeah, in the Army, and had the opportunity to go into counterintelligence. So I spent my Army days in civilian clothes and doing counterintelligence work for the Army, and which was great. Right, a great experience.
That's such
great training.
That's a cool job.
Great training. We had we were trained by the CIA agents and FBI agents in all kinds of things related to
counter surveillance.
That
kind of stuff.
All kind of stuff. And communism was very active at the time. Active in the unions. It was active on the university campuses. and active in Europe, trying to overturn the governments in Europe. So it was a big deal at the time. And so we had, it was great service, a great way to spend your time in the military.
Yeah.
So, but I still had a 6-year commitment after that. And so, but then I got out of the Army, started my graduate work in theological training, and my first congregation was a little town called Monroe in western Washington. It was a logging town, and a handful of people, and my salary was $250 a month, plus a house. And by that
parsonage,
time,
right? They call that parsonage.
Well,
they call it parsonage then? Or?
Well, the church didn't own it at the time.
Oh, okay.
They rented it for me, and we had 2 children by that time, and so that was my first experience at being a pastor.
So did you have another job in addition to being a pastor?
No.
So you made $250 a month.
$250 a month, and that didn't last terribly long. I think we were there 3 years or so. But pretty soon your clothes wear out, and your teeth need attention, and things you let go because you're living on a sub-poverty level.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because people would supply us with food. One of the men owned a grocery store, and he always knocked down the price of the grocers when my wife would shop. And we had a gang of teenagers. We had about 50 teenagers in our youth group.
Wow.
And I still have contact with some of them after all these years. So that was a great experience. I had an opportunity then. I was given a grant to do graduate study at Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. And I thought, well, I'll take another master's degree in preparation for maybe getting a doctorate. I did that. It was 2 of the best years as far as study was concerned, because I had a lot of individual assignments that I didn't have to attend class for. And I had a great mentor in my program. And at that same time, Evelyn's home church was in Los Angeles, downtown Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And we had been married in that church. And by the way, we had over 700 people at our wedding.
Wow.
Huge.
It is huge.
I just showed up. But I ended up being interim pastor. They were without a pastor, so they asked me to fill in. So I was, the time I was in Los Angeles attending Fuller, I was also pastoring her home church, which is right downtown LA.
Was it a big church, or?
Well,
I mean, that's a relative term.
It's a relative term. Maybe 600-700 people.
That's a fairly good-sized church.
Then I took a call to a church in Yakima, Washington, mm-hmm. and we were there for 4 years, and from there went to Seattle to another congregation, and so I pastored six different churches on the West Coast. And then after I retired early, took an early retirement. I was a real estate broker
Oh, really?
ran a real estate office in Portland, and did that for a while. My wife had already got into real estate, so we were kind of both in real estate after I retired from pastor. So I was in pastor for about 40 years.
Oh, okay.
And so that kind of covers my
Yeah.
my
So at that, I think most people, myself included, even having been, involved in church for quite some time, is that fairly common over the course of 40 years of ministry to be a pastor at 6, 8, 10 churches, or is that kind of
that was more common then than it is now? I think thinking has changed, that you're more effective the longer you stay, providing you wear well.
Right. Yeah.
They say it takes about 3 years before you really begin to be in an effective role with a congregation. Up to that time, it's just kind of preparation, getting acquainted, and people getting used to. They're usually going through a transition of leadership, and it takes time for people to adjust.
Well, if you think about it, for most people, it's your interaction. I mean, obviously there's during the week kind of things, but if your interaction is on the weekends, on Sundays, you get 50 interactions a year for a couple hours, right? So that's 100 hours a year. So if 3 years is not even that long, because it's 150 days, which is, 5 or 6 months, 5 months, and of total time.
So in three of the churches, I had the staff.
Okay.
So, and the other 3 were newer churches or smaller churches where I was the single pastor. So,
running the show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you like one more than the other?
Yes.
Are you going to say which one?
No, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there.
Well, because a lot of my friends, myself included, have been in CEO roles, executive roles, and I'm particularly interested in how those the senior pastor type role is similar to any other leadership role when you have a team.
Well, part of my objective was to build a team of leaders that were not ordained pastors.
Okay. Lay leaders, right?
Lay leaders. And that was probably one of the richest part of my work. And one of the great things about my career with pastoring is some of the greatest people I know, were in some of these churches. And just outstanding men and women, particularly men, outstanding men.
Yeah.
And just the privilege of having their friendship and the relationship with them, really one of the richest parts of the work. It's a great privilege, to be freed up from having to be self-supporting in order to spend time with people, and you work through all kinds of stuff with people, from birth to death to marriage, divorce. But one of the greatest thing, of course, is to see lives transformed by God's action and presence in their lives, and I've seen that by the hundreds.
Which is a privilege in and of itself.
It is. It is. So, some of the greatest experiences I've had in the church, some of the worst, hardest experiences have been in the church. People are messy.
Yeah, for sure.
and you get in the mess,
Yeah.
but that's part of it. That's part of it.
What do you think are some of the misconceptions that people have about pastors? Like 2 or 3. Because I think even churchgoers don't really know the life of their pastor, and just and I was curious what people may not realize.
I think the lack of privacy.
Yeah.
They know what you earn.
Right.
They know how you live. They know the car you drive. So there's a loss of privacy, which is really hard on wives
Oh, okay.
and children.
Mm-hmm.
That's why children really sometimes have a hard time, because they're kind of in a fishbowl.
Yeah, that's why we call them PKs, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Preacher's kids.
Yeah,
They tend to struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have 5 children, and but one of the reasons why all 5 of them are strong Christians is really because they saw transform lives. I remember one case. It was about 9:00 at night. A car drove in the driveway, and I was expecting somebody to come to the door, knock. Nobody came, so I went out, and here this little Volkswagen motor was still running, and walked up to the car, and this young woman was totally drunk, and how she ever even got in our driveways is another thing. And so one thing led to another, and she became a strong Christian. Her life was changed, but the great thing was that my older children saw this.
Mm-hmm.
And when you see that over and over and over again, that leaves an impact on the children.
Yeah.
So I don't know how many sermons I've delivered, but thousands. Because in some of the churches we had two services, and they don't remember anything I said, but they remember lives that were changed.
That's great.
And that's priceless.
Mm-hmm. I think most people, very few people get to witness people's lives getting changed. Whether it's in a Christian environment, a church environment, counseling environment, any of those kind of things. I think that's something that most of us don't get to see that.
A lot of it depends on the vitality of the church.
Yeah.
And because if you have a healthy church and you have people who are turning to Christ, getting baptized, this is all public. And and one of our congregations, the one I served in Seattle, we had a strong, the term would be a revival or renewal. Mm-hmm. And people were coming to Christ every week. And it wasn't my doing. It was our people were influencing their networks,
Mm-hmm.
Their families, their friends, and we had people coming out of the woodwork. It was a great time.
That's awesome.
Probably the highlight of my
Of your 40 years of
my
ministries?
40 years of ministry.
Yeah. That's really cool. I wanted to ask you, it's interesting, I had no idea about the juvie stuff, the young men, and what you did there. That's really interesting. I'm curious, I don't know what your exposure is now with young men, but one of the things that I've talked to other people about is how difficult it is for young men to learn how to be men. There's almost an anti-masculine sentiment. You know, they use words like toxic masculinity and that kind of thing, which I don't think everybody even understands. But I'm curious if you've seen over time, because we kind of glamorize, you know, when men were men, you know, and all of that back in, you know, the 40s and 50s, World War II, and, you know, Korea and Vietnam and all those kind of war era things. And I think that there's a little bit of propaganda involved in some of our memories that we have, but having lived that, I'm curious how you've seen what it means to be a man change from when you were younger and dealt with younger men up through now. Because I don't know anybody else that could give a, you know, lifetime of experience to answer that question.
Well, let me start with the negative.
Okay.
I think one of the major faults, and I can speak this because I'm speaking as a pastor, I'm not looking at it from the outside, I'm looking at it from the inside, is the failure of the church the term is disciple, to disciple men. That has always been a need, but it was more effective earlier in congregations than it is now in the last 30 years, maybe. So that men don't get the personal attention and don't get a chance to really cultivate a maturity in a wholeness in their lives. They're kind of expected that this is their role, and why aren't they filling it without helping them grow into these responsibilities. And I think we've reverted now to a lot of teachers, so public groups, maybe guys are good to listen. They listen for maybe a half hour or 45 minutes. And then when you hear somebody give a lecture, 2 hours from now, you can hardly remember what was said. You might remember a few things. And we've lost that capacity to help individual men. And I think that has contributed to a change as far as Christian men are concerned. And the strength of the church has made a change.
And you think that's similar outside of the church?
My observation is that with the breakdown of families, family life, has come an impact on men that makes them less prepared for the responsibilities they face once they get off on their own. Because they've had no example. They're kind of lunging at things, trying to put things together, struggling to, how to juggle all the balls that they're given to juggle, and I think the cookie crumbles easier for men at that point.
Because would it be true to say back, 40s, 50s, that there was a larger community for men, whether it be in the church? I mean, I assume that the church attendance was higher at that time than it is now.
Yes.
And it seems like that was a place that men could go to support and get supported. Or is that a false statement?
No, I think that's an accurate statement. Men were much stronger. They were bonded together much tighter, and worked together, and I mean, there were a lot of men's activities, men doing things together, and you had a lot of models, and that has it's kind of a vanishing thing nowadays.
Yeah, it's not. You don't now. By models, you would mean fathers in the home, or in like, how would you define
examples, mature examples in the church? I remember having coffee with a young man who was struggling with his faith. He was going to Stanford University, and we were talking, and he said, "Well," he said, "if there was ever a Christian, my dad was a Christian."
Yeah.
And that was I think that was symbolic of the anchor. That was the reference point for him, having a father who was just a very mature, quality person, and not very many men have that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so what's your model? What's your example? You don't have one.
Right.
That's a very fluid thing now. So.
Yeah, because I feel like that, even men now that are in their mid to late 30s, I'm 50, my kids are older, so they're now adults, young adults. But it seems like men in my age group now don't really even know what their full role is supposed to be. No. Because that trickle-down education is stopped, which then leaves... it gets diluted with every, it seems like it's getting diluted with every generation. And I think with young men now, teenagers, early 20s, I can't imagine trying to grow up as a guy now, because you don't even, everybody tells you how terrible you are all the time because you happen to be male. I had a discussion with another friend of mine the other day that was, his son is 19, 20, and just kind of your typical, man's man and all that, and what a unique individual that is, and how difficult it is, and how difficult it is for these young men to kind of learn how to be men. So I'm curious, if you were, like, how do we as men help bring up other men? And it can be in the context of the church. There's a lot of people that'll listen to this that don't go to church. But just in general, like with those, because men are not great at relationships, right? In general, I think it's gotten worse over time. But I'm curious how you see how we could do better.
Well, we see a decline in male leadership at all levels, church included. And I think for me, the remedy is mentoring. And you can't do this in large groups. I think the situations, each man is different. Each man has a different set of issues. And you can't throw a general solution out. They need individual attention. And so if I were going back into any kind of role where I was involved with men, I would train men to be mentors, and with the view that they would then take under their care other, preferably young men. Older guys don't respond as well.
Well, and I think that mentor-mentee...
When they're 50, they don't respond as well.
I mean, yeah. we're still hard to teach. But I think in a relationship like that, though, it's I think what gets lost sometimes is that a mentor-mentee relationship is really there's two it's a circular pipe, right? Or a circular stream, or however you want to say that. But you give to a younger man, and he gives back to you in your own education. You have experience in education, but these other guys have similar experiences, right, or different experiences and different knowledge and all of that. So I think that's something that could...
That's one of the benefits of experiencing being a mentor, is you get the reciprocation back of the relationship. Psychologically, they say if you go deeper with one person, that grows you into the capacity to go deeper with other people. So, this pulling in, holding everything in, and kind of masking the issues, that gets ripped off, and life begins to emerge, and issues can be looked at and worked through, and so this is where I think the Christian faith has a lot to offer men, simply because it has a pretty clear picture of what maturity is, and deals with character issues, deals with decision making, deals with priorities, deals with motivations. I mean, it takes us to the root of who we are.
Yeah.
And need to become.
Yeah. And some of us struggle more than others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I mean,
we're all in process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And when I think about the fact that I've been a Christian for a long time, I always feel like I should be farther along.
Well, don't we all? I mean, that's just part of the... But... I like being who I am. I'm pushing 92 years old, but I like who I am. I like my own company.
Yeah.
But that's been a long process.
Yeah. Was that the same at 30 and 40?
No, it was not. I was pressing so much, to do, to achieve, to become, to push. And it's, one of the great things in my life now is to be able to have joy and peace. I could die tomorrow easily, I've got a pacemaker. I've had 3 battles with cancer, and but there is a sense of completeness. It's hard to describe that. And I've lived so much of my life trying to live for the future, or trying to hang on to the past, that I'm learning now at my age, finally, to live in the moment, to live in the present. And there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah, it seems like it would be, and there's a bit of, some people might think it morbid, but when you really are in the twilight of your life, which, I mean, we've all determined that you're going to outlive all of us anyway, but...
Thank you.
But, in terms of, like, living for the future, at 91, almost 92, that future is much... you don't know. I mean, none of us really know, which is ironic, that I may have fewer days left on Earth than you do. Mm-hmm. But it seems like having that freedom... I don't know if it comes easier as you get older to have that sense of freedom and joy and peace.
It's a process, and I think process of defining who you are, mm-hmm. And I think there are several dimensions to it. One is how I perceive myself, and perceptions always need to be adjusted, You meet somebody, you have a perception of who they are.
Yeah.
And as you get to know them, that perception changes.
You thought I was a great guy until you really got to know me, right?
Until I knew. Now I found out he's just a jerk, So, but there's the perception of self. Then there's a perception of other people. And then there's the perception of life. Mm. And then there's a view of the world. And then you've got God. And so the coming to terms with all of those and having them synthesized together is a process. Mm. And when that comes together, then there's a wholeness in that life.
That's awesome.
One of the great things we discover about God, because of what he has said and done through Christ, is that God loves being God. Mm. He's complete. He's whole. And that's what that word perfect means. That there's a wholeness. He's complete. I mean, he's filled with joy. There's a completeness about God. And that completeness is slowly imparted to us as we begin to adjust our lives, figure out, okay, what are we going to adjust our lives to? What's the center of my life around which I'm building a healthy perception of myself, healthy perception of how I relate to other people, and then a healthy view of what life is, and at first these are all kind of, you get one maybe, mm-hmm. you figure it out, at least get started on one, then you've got all these other issues. You've got God, you've got the worldview, what's my worldview going to be? What's life, And then you dump into this enormous narcissistic cultural thing. You know, I'm entitled to my pleasures and one of the reasons why we were talking about mentoring, one of the reasons that this motivates me is because I know a lot of young, beautiful women who would love to be married, but they can't find a man that they're willing to commit to for the rest of their life, who has a character and integrity and got his act together. And so a lot of these women are remaining single because rather than commit to a loser or to somebody who is
below their standards.
Well, narcissistic.
Okay.
Really self-centered. Doing what they want to do, you know. A narcissist will not be able to sustain long-term relationships.
Right.
Because they're abusing relationships all the time for themselves. And so there's a lot of work to be done with men.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be done by trying to change the culture. It's got to be done man by man, individuals.
Counterculture. Because I think even men, narcissism in my mind is often rooted in, which is ironic, the more self-doubt you have, the more self-centered you can become, is what I've seen. I always, you meet someone that's just like, man, there are just men that you want to punch in the face because of how they act. But if then you get to know them and you see, the pain and the doubt and the anxiety and all of these things behind that, you realize that at the end of the day, the person just doesn't even know who they are. They don't like, the man doesn't know who they are and doesn't know who they should be, who they're trying to become. But that's interesting that you say that about these young women, because society would tell you otherwise, that women are just I don't need a man, or I don't want those relationships. But your experience has been that it's because the choices are poor for them.
Yeah, I mean, I've got 2 daughters, and they would like to be married. One of them particularly, my youngest, would love to be married. But, and when she makes commitments, she makes deep commitments. But she had a really difficult divorce. My son-in-law was very self-centered, unfaithful to her, and all of this came out, and so it's undermined her trust in making a deep commitment, because when she makes a commitment, it's going to be deep,
Right.
And she'd rather be single than to commit to a relationship that she can't really trust. So, I got scores of young women that come to my mind who've made the choice to remain single simply because they could not find a man whose quality of life they could commit to for the rest of their lives.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's a growing.
So we actually need women to teach men how to be better men in some ways. At least we need to. Well, we need to know that information, because I think most men probably don't.
Well, and now as the culture develops, you're looking for a body.
Yeah.
driven by your self-interest, of what a woman can give me,
Yeah.
instead of, I think the $64 million question, of a young man is, do I have the quality of life that a woman would want to commit to for the rest of her life? And I think that would be one of the goals of mentoring, would be to address that.
Yeah, because my guess is that more often than not, the answer to that is no. But I hope that the answer would be no, but I would like to have that.
Mm-hmm.
And so having these mentor type relationships would be something that you almost figure it out together. Because I think even men, obviously they're much older men that have been through more and have, learned like yourself. But then, even men that are in their 40s, or 50 or whatever, I think still struggle to really know what it is, who you are. We're still kind of figuring that out a lot of time.
Yeah. And your mistakes, your bad decisions, and I've made them, you learn by them, hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
and you can use those to teach
and
others.
And
right?
that becomes grist for mentoring,
And as far as, we use terms like mentee and mentor and mentoring and, all that. But, it's really just, I don't drink, but go have a beer or go have coffee or whatever. Invite these, pick someone that's in your world. Could be at your work, could be at your church, could be at your softball team or whatever. But, think about bridging that gap and starting that relationship.
The word mentor is a professional term,
right?
And I don't know another term that would work, but it's a supporting process, and it's really mutual.
Yeah. Well, Michelle and I, we've done marriage mentoring and marriage counseling and premarital and all that, and we have finally gotten to a point now where we are going to start meeting with a couple of couples, a couple of times a month each, and so it's one night a week for us, and but because we've been married almost 28 years and we've learned. But then it's something to where I like the couple mentoring too, because it's a little bit less intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
When you have both couples there, but then I can not only mentor the man, and we can have separate meetings too, but the wives learn from each other. Each wife can learn from the husbands, and the husbands can learn from the other wives, and get a different perspective too.
Yeah, it's a very broad
Yeah.
process, but it needs to be an intentional process.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't get intentional, it won't get done.
Right. So just set the meeting, set the coffee date, set the after work or whatever, right?
Yeah. And that's been the richest part of my life, has been investing in other men.
Yeah.
I had in our congregation in Seattle, we had all these people coming into the faith, and we were running short on leadership. So in a move that was a lot wiser than I ever knew, I decided I approached 24 men between 25 and 35 years old. And I said, I want you to consider meeting with me for a year, once a week. And he said,
'Cause, 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 '
The objective is for you to become leaders in the congregation. And so out of those 24, I got 12, interestingly enough. And for a year, we met. And the impact of those young men was enormous. And interestingly enough, for about 6 months while we were meeting, they would use humor to cover up issues.
I'm good at that.
Are you?
Yeah, I've used humor forever. Yeah.
And finally, when that broke open and really got down to interacting on issues at a really authentic, open way, the transformations were enormous. And it's probably the best thing I've ever done in my life is pour my life into those 12 guys. And
yeah, because I'm sure they've impacted hundreds and thousands over their life.
They have. And one of them just died here shortly, short time ago, about a month ago, and he was head of the wind tunnels for Boeing aircraft. They had contracts with wind tunnels in all over the world, France, Germany, I think, wherever they had wind tunnels, Boeing had contracts to use those for the development of their aircraft, and he was one of them. And I can't tell you how many men he impacted in his life. Not because he was aggressive about it, but just because of who he was. When he spoke, men listened,
Yeah.
because he earned that right by the quality of his life.
Yeah.
His marriage, his character, his integrity. It was an embarrassment to me in my life. I mean, that's just an example of how impactful when a guy gets all of his stuff together.
Yeah.
And starts moving and has a authentic center around which he's developing his life. And when you have a good center, then that impacts how you communicate, how you express, how your life begins to show, and then that impacts the connections with your people, and that impacts your influence, your legacy.
I think all of us would love to get at the end of our life and have to see a positive influence over the course of our lives. I think that would be.
Well, I think that's a God-given desire.
Yeah.
Because that's, we're born to reproduce.
Yeah, right.
Not only just to make babies, but that imparting of life, the imparting of wisdom, the imparting of character, the imparting of values, motivations.
Yeah.
I mean, those that's what makes life. That's what brings maturity. That's what brings a man to a place of peace in his life.
I think we'd all like more peace.
Yeah.
For sure.
But it's a process.
Hey, I've got a few questions. I've kept you for a while. I put this out on the interwebs, as we say, on Facebook, and I had a few people. I said, hey, I'm interviewing Fred. Fred's 91 years old, total badass, as I always refer to you. And if you had a chance to sit and talk to him, what would you ask him? So I actually have a few. If you're
Okay.
If you're okay. Well, we can rapid fire. We don't have to spend a ton of time on this.
Okay.
I got one of my friends, Ian, asked, ideally, how much longer do you want to live?
I want to live long enough to see my youngest daughter established in a healthy marriage. That's at this point. There's and this is hard to describe verbally, but there is a completeness that you feel that it's done.
Yeah.
But it's not quite done because
there's an open loop, right? Open circuit.
I want to see my youngest daughter in a good, healthy marriage, and it may not happen, but her girls, my granddaughters, are off on their own now. They're out of the home. She's alone, and so that's probably the last piece, as near as I could tell.
that closes.
But God may have something else, and I often ask myself, well, why am I still here?
Yeah.
Because most of my contemporaries are gone, or either that or they're non-functional. So
that's interesting. I mean, I love the idea of that. You're working, everything's working towards that completeness, and as a family, that open loop or open circuit or whatever is still there. So
probably the investment in your family is probably the best thing you can do, because then they relate to you as friends. They're no longer just your sons or your daughters. They become your friends, and you can't ask for anything better than that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I got my buddy Curtis had a bunch of questions, but let's see if I can kind of pick one that I like this. If you were in front of an arena full of students, what point would you want to make sure that you got across to them? That's a pretty good question. I like that question, Curtis.
Oh, that is a good question. Especially since I feel like a foreigner with this current generation. I guess I would encourage him to discover unconditional love.
I like that. Yeah.
Where are you looking for unconditional love? Almost everywhere you turn, it's conditional.
Right.
And until you come to God, and there you meet unconditional love. And so I would say,
I like that.
put a search on for unconditional love.
Yeah, because with social media and all the stuff that happens, everything is conditional, and obviously so many young people use sex and whatever else to kind of get that love. My buddy Joe says, what opportunity do you regret not taking?
Ooh. Okay, I got one. When I got to college, they gave us aptitude tests, and apparently I had a pretty high aptitude for music.
Interesting.
But I was hell-bent to serve God, and I didn't see where music played a part at that point. I was very immature.
Yeah.
And so I totally ignored the note I got from the head of the music department to come and have a conference with him, I totally ignored that. I think that was one of the great mistakes of my life.
That's interesting.
Not a great mistake, but
well, yeah, but it's the music.
I regret that.
Yeah, that's a regret.
I sincerely regret that.
Which I've heard you sing, and you probably know 1,000 hymns by memory. So that's,
well, and I led worship a lot.
Yeah.
The pastors usually led the worship and did a lot of singing, and but I think one of the things I would love to be able to do at this point in my life is sit down at a piano or a keyboard and just start playing.
I've always wanted to be able to do that. I've tried to teach myself a few times. I can play by ear a little, but yeah, to have that skill, just to be able to go into it, I always thought that was just so cool to be able to walk into a room and play.
So that's one that comes to my mind.
That's a good one. I like that one. And one last one, which is an interesting question. My friend Anna asks, what were your grandparents like?
Oh. I rarely knew them. My grandfather on my father's side came over from Germany, he and his brothers. They settled in Missouri on farms, and he was from the old country and very austere and had an enormous temper.
Mm.
And he would get mad and stay mad for 2 weeks. And that's about all I know about him. Mm. Then my father had the same characteristics, only he would get mad. He wouldn't talk for 3 or 4 days.
Really?
Just use silence as his tool.
Weapon. Or tool.
And I had a horrendous temper as a young man. I got in a lot of fights.
Did you?
And I was a skinny little guy, and I always lost.
Did stop you from getting in fights?
Didn't stop me from getting in fights. Just dumb. Just dumb.
Well, that's crazy. You've been married for a long time, have a successful family with ups and downs, just like anybody else. I think you represent to me a life well lived, but still continuing to grow. I have older people in my life that I just feel like they're just kind of waiting to die. And I don't get it. Like, whether you're 40 or 50 or 70 or 90, continue to live life, learn, grow, and, drop dead doing something that you love, right? Not just...
Yeah. One of the great things about the Christian faith and a relationship to Christ, a personal relationship to Christ, is that it brings a certainty about the future.
Yeah, you don't have to be afraid where you're.
Well, the term is hope,
Mm-hmm.
but in our English language, hope is kind of a strong wish.
Yeah.
But in the language of the scriptures, the original language of the scriptures, that word is a certainty. Is a joyful certainty. Mm. And so that's one of the benefits of the presence of God in a person's life, is that growing certainty, joyful certainty of what lies ahead.
Yeah.
And the certainty that all these friends we've had will be part of that future. And, there's a lot of lot of writing about after-death experiences or near-death experiences, and but deep down inside, there's that growing certainty that there is a tremendous future ahead, and so that contributes to the current sense of peace and joy that both Evelyn and I have, my wife.
Who is still kicking also.
Yeah,
which is a minor miracle in itself that she's managed to live with you for almost 7 years.
Yeah. There's a reason why she's very godly woman.
Oh yes.
And I contributed to that because she learned a lot of things because of my behaviors.
Don't they all? Well, hey, I really appreciate it. This has been super interesting for me, and I think that it'll be helpful for other men, and I hope that they'll maybe seek out some relationships on either side and start growing.
Well, I don't know whether any of them would kick back some questions, spinning off of this. Yeah. Maybe there's another session.
Yeah, we might have to have you back. I'll once people read it, I'll encourage you to write in the comments some more questions, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much. And that's it. Thanks, Fred.
Okay.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.